Welcome to Club E. Hi, I'm Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I am your architect of business growth, and I'll work with you to unlock the potential and amplify the scale of your company. Today, we're talking about activating strengths for impact in a changing world. Thank you to our sponsors, Irish Titan, an e-commerce and web development firm, Boulay Group, CPAs and advisors, Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank, Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency, Minnesota Sales, a sales acceleration firm, and the Network Connect, a catalytic gateway for growing your company. Before we get going, I'd like you to subscribe and like our Club E channel. So take a moment, I'll wait for you. Click on the subscribe and like button. It's below the video. It's going to help us deliver better content to you, our wonderful audience, and let you know when our sessions are going live. I'd like to introduce today's speakers, Michele Krolczyk and Tricia Davidson. Welcome, Michele and Tricia.
Hello.
And their contact information is in the comments field below, so you can find out how to get a hold of the two of them by looking there in the comments section. All right, so Michele and Tricia. Michele, I guess we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, the firm, and the various activities you're up to.
I would be happy to do that. So hello, everyone. Good to be here with you. So I am an EOS implementer and a strengths communicator. So for those of you who may not know what EOS is, it's short for Entrepreneurial Operating System. And EOS is something that's used by many organizations in the Twin Cities to help them articulate a vision and strategy, but then also put a framework of process and tools into place so that they are effective in executing on that strategy. I came to EOS by way of business ownership. So my husband and I own a commercial roofing business that has been in my family for 70 years. In fact, this is the 25th year of ownership for us. And we've been using EOS inside that company since about 2011. So I'm going to do a little shout out to Mint Roofing, hashtag best roofing company in the Twin Cities. And little did I know then that once I saw how effective it was in helping us really get smart about how we were conducting ourselves as a business, that it would tee me up for my next chapter, which is now coaching other organizations on how to use the system effectively inside their organizations. So fast forward to today, I've expanded this work to include a focus on strengths. And fun fact, Tricia and I actually went to high school together. And after decades of not seeing each other, we actually reconnected about a year and a half ago. And those conversations have sort of spurred on the work that we have been doing together. And so from there, Tricia, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Great. So I started a different path. I started my career in advertising. The primary was at a couple agencies, but primarily at Fallon, kind of in the early 90s when they were growing and really hot. In 2001, I moved over to a subsidiary of Fallon, the Duffy Design Group, and helped to lead that group. And in fact, in 2004, we decided to spin out, and we became an independent strategic branding and design firm. I continued on my partnership there for about a decade. We did some really great work across industries around the world. And then in 2013, I decided it was time for me to launch into something different too. And I've been consulting independently since then. I'm a collaborator at heart. And so when Michele and I reconnected a couple of years ago and started talking, sharing stories about our clients, where we were finding successes, some common places where people tend to stub their toes, we just kind of started working. And I don't think I would have guessed we'd be sitting here today. We just started talking and our ideas gelled, and now we've come up with a whole series of workshops that we tested out about a year ago and seem to be doing really well to help teams grow and build strength and be more impactful. So that's a little bit about me.
So it doesn't happen every day that I do an interview with people who went to high school together. I'm not going to put you on the spot because there's the saying of mutual destruction, right? So I'm sure there's a few stories, but where'd you go to high school?
We went to Orono High School.
Okay.
Western suburbs.
Yep. And then Michele, we can't just move on about the roofing company and not get the website for the roofing company for our audience out there, because it's summer in Minnesota and that's the time to be working on roofs, at least now through the fall. So what's the website for the roofing company?
Well, thank you. It's mint roofing.com.
Okay. And you said how many years in the family?
So it was started by an uncle in 1950, and my husband and I took it over as the third generation owners in 1995.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, I bet that is an interesting part of your business journey, and I can see how EOS tied into that. All right. So before we get to our event, let's talk about what you, our audience, can receive. Today's hashtag is Strengths Finder, and 2 winners are going to receive the Strengths Finder 2.0 book that includes an assessment code, so you can go through this process yourself. Put your questions into the comment field. Again, you can see their email addresses and reach out to our panelists today if you'd like it. Again, the hashtag is Strengths Finder, and 2 winners will receive a Strengths Finder 2.0 book with the assessment code. All right, let's start with the foundational question. Tell us a little bit about the CliftonStrengths, how it works, and also I think people are always interested in about how accurate these kinds of assessments are. So maybe talk a little bit about the accuracy as well.
Absolutely. So Don Clifton posed an interesting question over 6 decades ago, which is, what would happen if we actually studied what was right with people instead of what was wrong with people? And so began a 40-year study on tracking what people's strengths and talents were. And they identified 34 different common talents or strengths that they saw as based on this study. And so was born what is now known as the CliftonStrengths assessment. So you can go online. This is an online assessment tool. And in addition to that, so 23 million people have globally taken this assessment. So you can only imagine the data and the analytics that Gallup has been able to gather over the course of the last 20 years. So the first assessment started in about 1998. The first book came out in 2001. And they took those 4 strengths and they divided them into 4 domains. So for those of you who have taken the assessment, you also know what the domains are. The first one is executing. So those are strengths that are associated with people who really know how to get things done. So taking an idea and really executing on it. Another one is strategic thinking. So those are people who are really good at analyzing data and absorbing and analyzing that data. Influencing is another one of the domains, and that is people who really know how to sell ideas. Those are the storytellers in any group. And then the 4th one is relationship building. So those are the connectors and the builders of relationships and bringing people together. So you can imagine that once you have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about yourself, and I think that that's pretty common, people take the assessment and they think, oh, this is really interesting. And I think that most people find it to be fairly accurate or very reflective about themselves. So not very often do I hear people talk about, oh, I was really surprised that was one of my strengths. Doesn't happen a lot, maybe occasionally. So in terms of accuracy, I would say is, as far as how honest you answer all of the questions is, again, you're going to give you probably the most accurate picture. Now, keep in mind, there's 34 strengths, and they are going to give you the top 5. So there's, however many down below, 29, I just did the math. And you can pay for additional money. You can unlock all of those strengths. And some people, it just kills them. They want to know what their last strength is. What's the bottom one? But again, the idea here is that the whole notion is behind this is that we're really focusing on what are we naturally best at, as opposed to what are the weakest things that we are. Because again, we are a culture that is known for focusing on our weaknesses and trying to figure out how can we put time and energy into creating these things that we're not good at, as opposed to if we really focus all of our energy on the things that we're naturally good at. Imagine how much better you will be as an individual. And then it allows you to start thinking about, well, then as a team, how do we look? And how can we better communicate with each other? How can we better understand each other? How can we understand what each other's needs are? And it creates that common language, which if you don't have that language, it's really difficult to describe whatever your strengths happen to be. So that's a little bit about the overall.
Okay. Tricia, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think she covered it all really well.
Quick question. As people age, do they change much, from their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and up? or are people kind of locked in and it's more a indication of how accurate they answer the questions?
So Gallup really takes the stance that you only need to take the assessment once, because your strengths are your strengths from the time you're about late teens or early 20s forever. So those have already been formulated inside of you as far as how you're wired. Now I've had people say, well, I've taken it more than once and my results were different the second time. So keep in mind, what you can't see if you've only ever known your top 5 is numbers 6, 7, and 8. So those may bubble up, again, depending on how you may have answered some questions differently. But overall, no, I think that once you've taken the assessment, those are your top 5 strengths. And I think too, the other thing that can maybe influence whether a strength goes up or down is, the environment or your opportunity to actually use those talents. And I think Tricia's going to actually touch a little bit more on that.
Sure. So with all the various tools that are out there, why do the two of you focus on the CliftonStrengths?
It's a good question. There are so many tools out there. And in a lot of cases, we've been with teams or organizations where they use multiple tools. And, I think that the more you know about yourself, the better. I've taken many, many of these different kinds of assessments. But at the end of the day, I think strengths is really great, because what it does is the assessment helps to identify natural patterns of how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. So it asks you questions kind of in all 3 of those realms, and then it correlates those. And it identifies, as Michele said, talents. So some people have actually said that StrengthsFinders is maybe a misnomer. It really should be Talent Finder. But the concept about it is that they really want to start a global conversation about maximizing human potential. And so you learn about your talents. It gives you the language. And in this case, StrengthsFinder actually takes a little bit longer as an assessment. It goes through more questioning, and there are 34 talents that it identifies, as Michele said. So a lot of people would say it's more nuanced than some of the other assessment tools out there that might just give you 1 of 4 letters or put you in a quadrant. That nuance, I think, is beneficial because if it is about starting a global conversation about what's right with us and how we maximize our potential, it gives you language and nuance and dimension to how to have that conversation. And so it's really great. And then I think the other thing is that it requires practice, or it requires dialogue. So as Michele said earlier, you can take it, but really then it's about, well, what do we do with it? And so how do we practice our strengths? How do we think about them in that positive way as opposed to the fixing mentality? And then the other thing that I really like about it is they've done all this math, and they've found, and the analytics, as again Michele referred to, they found that actually the likelihood of you having the same strengths in the same order with another person is only 1 in 33 million. And what that says to me is that it really finds how diverse we all are, how unique we all are. And in all of my businesses, I've always believed that diversity is really what helps to elevate the thinking, to elevate the work product, to elevate the productivity. And so that's one of the things that I find really interesting and I think is very differentiating.
And then with tens of millions of people taking this, that's an amazing track record. Is it kind of a United States phenomena, or is it more of a global activity?
Very much global.
All
over the country, or all over the world, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. So for the two of you, was there kind of an aha moment that you had that caused you to be this interested into the CliftonStrengths?
I was thrilled that you asked this question because yes, there was actually a very much a distinct aha moment for me. And it was, I had just early on in my EOS coaching career, I was working with a new team, and I was also going through a StrengthsFinder certification. And so it just so happened that this team had just done the StrengthsFinder assessment on their own. And so they were kind enough to share the results with me. So before we went into a session, I just happened to be, kind of looking at them as a team. I had plotted all of their strengths out on a grid. just kind of to familiarize myself with sort of the makeup of the group. Well, we went into a session, and one of the conversations got rather heated between two of the partners. So one of the partners was like, I'm just really frustrated with you. It doesn't feel like you're listening. It doesn't seem like you're engaged. I can't tell if you care about this. And, it was a very tense moment. And so we took a break. And when we came back, I said, I think what's important is for you to understand that one of Lisa's strengths is that of deliberative, and which I think is one of yours too, Rick.
Yes.
Rick.
Yeah.
And so I said a person with the strength of deliberative is absolutely paying attention, but they're absorbing all of that information and they're internalizing it and they're really thinking about it. But they got to process it. They need the time and the space to process that. They're going to give you a great answer, but they can't do it Johnny on the spot like you, Mr. Strategic, can do with very little information and be able to make a spot and want to go, go, go. That those two things look different. So as soon as we had that conversation, it made them take a huge step back. They realized that these were, again, strengths that they were bringing to the table, but they had not, before this moment in time, been able to really appreciate the difference in each other and what they were bringing to the table. So that was really, I was like, wow. So for me now, when I do work with EOS, I have everyone, all on the team, start with the Strengths Finder assessment. So that, again, just for me, from a coaching perspective, it really helps me understand the makeup of the group and can sometimes turn difficult conversations, which is, again, very related to the work that Tricia and I have been doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not sure I've had an aha moment. For me, it's been more of a revealing, maybe, both personally and professionally. So I worked with a woman in several of my jobs, and she was in one particular situation really struggling with a project and struggling with the team and trying to figure out how to move things forward and do it in an effective way and do it in a way where people would still be engaged and excited. And she had the strength of woo, and woo, you think of woo, but it really stands for win others over. And we talked about it. It was funny. We had both done strengths, not professionally, just as colleagues who had become friends. And it gave me the opportunity to say to her, well, what about your strength of woo? And we had, a giggle and actually some really good conversation. And she went into it, and it was a thing that helped her break through. And then personally, another funny story. So my whole family's taken it, and it's interesting. We all share one common top 5 strength. And my husband and I both have achiever as a top 5 strength. He also has competition. And I did my strengths years ago, but it wasn't until, honestly, probably maybe not even a year ago, we were sitting at the dinner table, and he was talking about something, and he mentioned how, well, yeah, of course it's a competition. You have to be the best. You have to win. And I said, well, what do you mean? And it was, he wasn't being very specific about what he was talking about. And he said, well, everything. And I said, everything? And he said, well, yes, everything, every day. And I said, what? I said, do you mean you're competing with me? And he said, yes, everything, everyone, every day. And it was just so interesting. We've been together for over almost 30 years. And just that little insight in that moment, how he's wired, and he's quiet about it. It's not overt. But again, so it continues to reveal nuance and dimension in people for me.
Well, you just have to get a competition going of who can clean the house the best, and then he'll take that and run with it.
Exactly.
So with all that's been going on lately, things that people held true now are changing, and everybody's challenging virus and then civil unrest, and there's just a lot of stuff going on. How does all of this and trying to help people kind of get through a challenging time?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And actually, some of the most recent work we've done has been with teams kind of to really address just that. So first, to take them through the general strengths piece of things so that they've got that understanding of themselves and their team, but then to really use it as a springboard for conversation about, okay, so how are these strengths showing up in these really ever-changing times? And these times, in some cases, quite stressful. So for example, I would say that there's two things that can happen with your strengths when you're talking about, I mean, something as huge as a global pandemic or these, cries for social justice. They can either go dark, like they don't even feel like they're there, or they can go into hyperdrive. And I'll use two of my strengths as an example to sort of illustrate that. You know, I have one of my strengths is input. I mentioned that earlier. And input is someone who really likes to have a lot of information, and they like to read about a lot of information, and they like to have a lot of facts. And so, they research, and then they collect all that data and they kind of store it. So there's of course a lot of information and a lot of data being shared right now. And so I can have, 62 tabs open on my computer, which my family will make fun of me, because it's like, oh, I'm reading an article, and then I click on something in that, and I go to the next thing, and then I click on something, and pretty soon I've got, 10 articles open because I'm interested in all of it. And so right now, like, that is just in high gear. Whereas my input, which is sort of, or I'm sorry, my arranger, which is sort of an orchestrator, big picture, what are all the pieces, how do they all fit together? That has been like, it's caused, some amount of angst and stress, because I can't make sense of all the pieces right now. They haven't fit together for me. So again, so what do? My input continues to be in hyperdrive because I'm trying to find the information to help me put all the pieces together and make it all make sense. We were talking with someone who's had a strength of futuristic, and those are people that live in the future and are always thinking about what's next on the horizon. You can imagine that with someone with that strength, it would be super challenging to be in these times of great uncertainty where we don't really know what the future holds. We don't know what next week really is going to look like. So that can be really frustrating. But if you have the language, if you have that understanding of yourself, and again, that of your teammates or family members or partners, it makes it a lot easier to understand some of the emotions that you're feeling. It makes it a lot easier to understand maybe why you're feeling so frustrated and where that frustration is coming from. And then, but at the same time, it's like when the dust settles or the sting wears off, it also gives you those same tools to then start thinking about, okay, how are we going to start working to move forward? How are we going to pull together? How are we going to tap into the strengths that are there, that are still shining for us, so that we can start moving forward again? And that's been, like I said, that's been some of our most recent work that has been helping a lot of different teams. Anything to add, Tricia?
No, you did a great job. I'm one of those futuristic girls, and it's been hard for me.
Yeah. Nothing is perfect. Reality is not perfect. So what are some of the potential pitfalls of the CliftonStrengths?
That's a super question. I think one of the key ones is when people get their strengths, and then especially in a dynamic where you're talking about them with a team, and people realize, oh, you have this strength and it might be in the executing domain, and I have this strength and it might be in the strategic thinking domain. Some people quickly think, thank God I don't have to execute anymore. Or thank God I can go and check everything off my to-do list. I don't have to be in those, long-term planning kinds of sessions. And the truth is that strengths are not a get out of jail free card. We all have stuff we got to do. Some things we like better than others. But what we work with teams to do is say, okay, if something is hard for you, or if it doesn't bring you as much joy, how do you look at those strengths and take a piece of a strength to help you rise up and do those things that are harder for you? So one of the pitfalls is people can say, oh, I'm out. I don't want to do that. Another thing is, and this is kind of building on what Michele said, sometimes our strengths go dark or dormant, or sometimes they go into overdrive. And so I think the awareness is really important, because what we always want to do is try to have our strengths be generative for ourselves and for others, and not degenerative. So, if we're not aware, or if we're in a time of stress, our strengths can become degenerative, And that, I guess, I don't know if that's as much a pitfall of strengths as it is human nature, but, about awareness. Three other things that I thought of, as I was thinking about that just kind of came to mind. One is that, there are 34 talent themes that come up. And it's interesting. It's inevitable when we work with teams. Somebody will say, I want to unlock all 34. And the very first thing they do is they go to the bottom. And that's just really not what StrengthsFinders is about. It's not to figure out what your least strong talent is. So, I mean, I think human nature is that maybe people go to that bottom and they start to think in that fixed mentality, if you will. And then, I think the two other things is that, again, a talent, if not practiced or developed, just like a muscle, doesn't become a strength. So again, it's really less about a pitfall, but more like if you think, oh, that's my strength, I don't have to do any more around it. You could get lazy. And it doesn't do you much good if you take that assessment. You know about you, but you really don't know about others, right? Because it's really rare that we're all just focused on ourselves. So, I would say that might be something that people think they can do with this assessment. And I do think some of the other assessments tend to be really self-focused, help you know about yourself. But the real benefit, the real opportunity is in looking at it in the context of other people, how you work, how you live, those kinds of things, I believe.
All right. Michele, nothing to add there?
No, I thought that was good coverage.
All right. So again, reminder, hashtag StrengthsFinder. You can ask your questions, get in the drawing to receive a StrengthsFinder 2.0 book with the assessment. And also reminder, hit the subscribe and like button for the Club E channel. And I'll deliver some more information on this later, but we're doing podcasts now with these sessions. So you'll be able to get these sessions not only on the YouTube channel after the fact, but also through podcast format. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Reminder, hashtag StrengthsFinder for the book drawing. All right, so you two both work with teams. Before we started today, you talked about a 2-day event, a couple hours each day that you've been working on, but talk a little bit about some of the ways that you work with teams using strengths.
Sure. So when Tricia and I first got together and we started having these conversations, our observations of the work that we did in our respective businesses was very similar in the work that I do with teams. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, Rick, that it's interesting to me, we bring these teams together and we're going to expect them to work together to make big changes and big decisions. But if there's no discussion first about, what the makeup of that team is and what the strengths are and where the gaps are and that kind of insight, it can be really challenging for people. And so I think one of the things that I definitely notice in the work that I do is that, for example, we talk about issue solving. So in the EOS world, that's called IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. I've noticed that some teams do it quite effectively and other teams really, really struggle to, again, be effective in their ability to try and find what the root cause of a problem is. And I think a big part of that is because they're not understanding at least why they are approaching it the way they're approaching it, and consequently their teammates. And so that's just one example. So what Tricia and I did, and feel free to jump in, Tricia, that we decided that we were going to develop sort of these sprint style workshops because not everyone, first of all, it's so hard for teams to find a full day. I mean, there's all these full day training sessions that people would love to do, but it's hard to find that kind of time, especially when we're talking about a global society. So one of the teams that we just worked with, we were across every single time zone in the United States, and we had a couple of people in Western Europe. So that just gets harder and harder to find full days where you're able to do that. The other thing too is I think just focus time and attention, that if you can make something very concise and deliver something in a shorter amount of time, it can be very hard hitting, very impactful, and things that the people on the team can start using right away. So if you have anything to add to that, that's a little bit about where our philosophy came from in terms of how we were going to do these offerings.
And I think, you've heard me say the word practice a few times. I think that's part of the thinking behind it too. If we can do short spurts with some good information and lots of interaction and engagement, and then come back in a month or 2 months and build on that, that is what we're finding. Our theory going in was that that would be really effective and very engaging, and we're finding in practice that it is.
And I have to say, for our audience out there, having done the assessment myself, it's very accurate about me. So definitely I can see how it'd be of value to your teams and how people solve problems and work together. So totally get that. Michele, you've mentioned EOS a couple of times. Talk a little bit about how strengths fit with your EOS practice and activities.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of already touched on this, where before I begin a new engagement with any team, I have them do an assessment. And everyone's always eager to do it. They're always very excited about it. And actually, if I had my way, we would all do maybe a strength session before we even started EOS, but that doesn't always play out that way. But I think a big part of it, again, is at least as the facilitator, I can understand sort of, again, the makeup of the group. So as an example, I started not too long ago with a new team, and of the 8 people on the team, seven of them have achiever as one of their top 5 strengths. So I'm like, whoo, all right, so they're gonna get a lot done, and they're gonna be super eager to get going on this, and they're gonna make stuff happen. But at the same time, I thought, I did warn them. I said, you may also begin to feel really impatient, because EOS is a process and it's a journey, and it's not like a one and done. Now, as soon as we're done with the implementation, you've got this. You know, it's something that evolves over time. So, and actually, I think it's playing out exactly as I thought. So they love it because it's structure and they're able to get stuff done even faster. But at the same time, it's like there's other pieces of it that just move too slow for them, and they get, you know, a little anxious. So I just think that it's an opportunity, and we do have a little bit of discussion along the way when we're having some deep conversations or challenging conversations where it's you know, hard things have to change or decisions need to be made. And this, again, I think has allowed people to have at least a little bit more understanding about how to appreciate where they're coming from and appreciate where others are coming from. So I think it's been a key element of my practice.
And Tricia, how about you? How has your awareness of the CliftonStrengths made you better at the advertising and branding work that you've done?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the whole idea of human psychology is kind of, I think, innate in all of those things. And if you think about strengths as uncovering authentic talents, I kind of liken that to brand strategy, which is about uncovering authentic truths about a company, its mission, its values. And then if you think about the marketing side of what I do, you know, this idea of starting a conversation and creating empathy, you know, whether it's advertising or whether it's internal communications or promotions, you know, that is really core to it. So I think it's helped to enrich how I think about it, and how I think about it, you know, down to not just audiences or consumers or customers, but, you know, people. We're all people, and the people doing the work, the people selling the work, the people buying it, you know, it's all based on kind of that psychology of what is authentic and true, and how do you communicate that in a way that is compelling, relevant, and differentiated.
So question from the audience, let's say we got a team, everybody's done the tests, they have their top 5 strengths. What are just, obviously there's a lot of depth to it that you all would need more time doing, but what are 1 or 2 things people could do to either better interact or work with other people once awareness of the strengths are there?
You want to take that, Michele? Or you want me to?
Good. Feel free.
Sure.
I'll jump in where necessary.
I mean, I think the first thing would be sharing those strengths, you know, so that people really understand what the strengths are. And that's how we always start the workshop. And we ask people to think about them in the context of reality, you know, give us an example of when this came to life. We talk a lot about kind of feelings and behaviors too. You know, what are the things that frustrate you if you're an executor versus a strategic thinker? What are the things that are easy for you and that you are going to commit to the team? You're always going to be able to jump in and help in this area. So conversations like that, and then just the awareness of thinking through, you know, okay, we've got a team that's really well balanced or heavy in one area and we need to do X, starting to think about maybe different roles or different opportunities to play new roles on a team that might not fit the traditional title or position, because they might have a talent that would lend itself to it. So, a lot of it is sharing, and then understanding, how do we fit the puzzle pieces together, and how does that make us stronger, and where do we get frustrated, and then if we're frustrated, how do we like dig out of it?
Okay.
I would add to that, just taking the time to at least be reflective. So one of the things that we talk about is that Tricia mentioned earlier about we want our strengths to be generative, but at the same time, we're all human. And so, every strength has two sides to it. You can call it a shine and a shadow side. And so to be aware how your strengths might be sometimes almost a little too strong. So I'll use woo as an example. That sometimes a woo is and woo actually comes in a variety of different forms, a couple different primary ways, but they tend to be very gregarious, and sometimes, but the problem is that they might be considered, disingenuine. Like they're so happy to meet so many people. They're great connectors, great networkers. So to be aware of how you could be perceived is another really key thing. So that if you're going into a situation where maybe you're doing a presentation or you're trying to sell somebody on an idea, if you're aware of the strengths that you have and to call upon them, and again, in a more generative capacity, can really be helpful in terms of how well you come across and how well you will be received, as opposed to going in blindly. If you've taken that time and opportunity to really reflect on, is that a possibility? Like, how can I use this in the best way possible, in the best way I intend for this to come off? And how might I overstep or overreach in some area, depending on a strength? And how can I make sure that I'm mindful of that? And I think all of us can be far more effective in our communication styles as a result of that.
Yep, that makes sense. And a reminder for our audience, hashtag strengths finders. You can put in your questions, get your name in the drawing to receive the Strength Finder 2.0 book. We do have a couple of more questions here. This one ties into what we just answered, a little bit of overlap, but slightly different. Question from Casey. Can you talk about how a client of yours adjusted their team structure in order to maximize the talents of each of their members? So it dovetails a little bit into what we just talked, but maybe there's a thread that you could pull on to give another example.
Sure. I don't know that it necessarily means that they adjust their structure as much as they now understand how they can call upon each other to help. So if you are someone who doesn't have a top 5 strength in influencing, but you've got something to pitch or sell, you may very well tap a teammate to say, okay, can you help me out with this? Can I pick your brain a little bit for how I can be more effectual in delivering this information? Or if you're someone who's not strong in executing, partnering with another person who is strong in executing can be a really smart and strategic partnership. So I don't know that's necessarily about structure so much as how can we understand, again, we're not striving to be well-rounded individuals. We're striving to be well-rounded teams. And so understanding where we're strong and where we're not, and knowing how to call upon each other, I think is the more critical aspect. What would you say, Tricia?
I think that's good. I mean, I think, I don't think Gallup would recommend, nor would we, that you use strengths finders to recruit people or to necessarily build team structures, for example. But that awareness can help you if you're going to be filling a spot to think about how you could balance. And also, it's interesting. I think Facebook has been said to hire the smartest people, and they do strengths, I believe, still for all their people. And then what they do is they craft the jobs around people's strengths. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to make a job easier for one person in one role than another. But what the idea is that if you take their responsibilities and you think about crafting them around people's strengths, then people are more engaged. And if they're more engaged, they tend to be more productive. And then individuals, teams, and companies all benefit from that. So again, I wouldn't say it's exactly structuring the team, but it's about thinking about how you use those things to shape and mold.
All right, so this is interesting because this question came in from Jim, and I think you just answered the question. I'll get the question out from Jim and see if you'd layer anything on top. How should a small company looking to hire a new employee analyze an existing team to know the ideal profile of a candidate? So again, partially you just answered that, but again, I think there's a couple pieces here. Small, does that make any difference? And then trying to think about what an ideal candidate looks like.
So again, I would never use StrengthsFinder as the one and only thing assessment that you would necessarily use in a hiring situation. That said, I do know that there are companies, in fact, including Mint Roofing, where if we get candidates down to sort of a final few, we'll often ask them to do a StrengthsFinder assessment just because we want to see again how are they going to end up fitting into the overall group and the overall team. What does that look like? So it would be a red flag to me if, let's say, we were hiring an administrative person whose job was going to be very execution oriented, very detail oriented, very process oriented, and if they had zero strengths in the domain of executing, well, I'd be like, so how do you think it would allow me to ask the right questions as far as how are you going to be good at that detailed aspect of your job? So I think it can spur some really good interview questions that might drill down a little further than you could otherwise.
And I think Michelle's, point is really good. It helps you frame the conversation. The hope would be that wouldn't be a red flag and say, no, we're not going to hire that person. Because if I take myself, for example, I don't have any of my top 5 in the influencing domain, which is interesting because I built my career, one would argue, all around influencing, right? Branding, marketing, advertising, public speaking, things like that. So again, if you looked at my top 5 strengths, you might not think that I fit in the industries that I've worked in. But if you have the conversations around me, it could be my number 6 or 7. But so it's really then about how do we engage in that conversation.
Well, and Rick, you asked about small. And although it's critical for everyone to make the best possible hire they can, if for anyone who has worked in a smaller organization, you know how even more critical it is because people are usually wearing multiple hats, and it's bad fits are felt faster.
Absolutely. So another question about teams. This one's coming from Dale. Is the goal for teams to be well rounded or highly productive, or is there some other feature that you would say would make a good team or be a goal for a good team?
So I would say that I think what's behind strengths is the idea that people are highly engaged. And it's easier for me to be engaged in something that I feel good about, that I can get positive outcomes in, than something that's really a struggle for me. And so that's kind of the theory behind it, is that if I'm engaged in things that are my innate talents, I will be happier, healthier, more productive. The side of that then is that the balance comes in then, if you will, by being aware, because then I am aware of my role and others on the team. If we have places where we're stronger and weaker, then we can have the conversation, because we also now have a common language about how we're going to make sure that that doesn't become a weakness that inhibits our productivity or our success in the long run. So maybe that's a yes and.
Yeah, I was going to say if 2 things can be true, and I would say I'm not trying to avoid the answer, the question, but I think it's what we're really aiming here is to be increased productivity, to maximize impact, to be efficient. And so again, this is just one of the ways by having this language in place that helps teams better do all of those things.
Okay. Again, hashtag Strength Finder, get a question, get your name in the drawing for the book. Have a question from Sherry. I know we touched on why strengths versus other platforms, but Sherry's question is, can you highlight the difference between DISC training and how you're helping teams with the Strength Finder?
Now, I'm not very well versed on DISC.
Okay.
And Tricia, you and I actually were looking into all of this yesterday when we were talking. I feel unqualified to answer that
Okay.
question.
All right.
Yeah, I think that I'm not DISC certified. I think my understanding of DISC is that you're in one of four quadrants, and a lot of it is contextual. Which of those four quadrants, do I bring forward most in a tense situation, in a work situation, in a personal situation. And I think while context matters with strengths as well, for sure, the idea is that you again have these innate talents, and that they may come alive in the assessment in a rank order, and then they may function differently, the functional order, in different areas of your life. So I think that's one of the differences. And then I think that, again, this idea that it's a little bit more nuanced, it goes a little bit deeper. It does show kind of the depth and dimension. I think that is also one of the things that is, as I understand it, different. And DISC is one of the ones that, I've looked at it a little bit. I have not taken a DISC profile myself, so I don't have that personal comparison.
Sure. All right. So as we aim towards the finish line here for today, if you reflect on your comments thus far, or maybe there's something that we haven't covered that you'd like to put on the table for our audience, if you had to leave everybody with kind of one main thing as a takeaway, or kind of one more nugget of information that you want to make sure our audience hears today, what would that be?
So for me, I think my leave behind would be, if you do the CliftonStrengths assessment, you're going to learn something about yourself for sure, and that's great. But if it's just kind of a one and done, and you don't really take it any further than that, you're sort of missing out on its true benefit. If, however, you take some time to reflect on those strengths and think about how they show up in certain work environments, how they show up in your personal life, how they show up, how you interact with your family, it's kind of like yoga. I mean, it's a practice, and you have to do it and use it in order for it to become its most effectual thing that it can be. So hopefully my leave behind is, don't make it a one and done. Take it to the next level, and especially if, whether it's inside a family or inside a team, I just think that it has the potential to really make a huge difference. Tricia, I know you had one.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I look at it, I think about strengths, and as I see it, it is a really good example of the universal power of positivity. And I say that in a number of ways. Again, it's like when we look at things optimistically, people want to be with us. When we take the things that are positive about ourselves, it's easier for us to do it, therefore more efficient, and most often more effective. And so, I think if we do that, and then if we also have this mindset that we come to the table, and I think this is one of the things that we really try to help people with, assuming positive intent, again, that generative idea of strengths, and that we are intentional then also about our positivity when we're interacting with other people. The dynamics and the productivity measures just all, start to elevate. And so I think that's one of the things about strengths, and I guess just in general, kind of a philosophical thing that for me, strengths helps people find, and we're finding that again in family situations as well as in professional settings.
Okay. Well, a reminder for our audience, you can find Michele and Tricia's email addresses in the comments field below. We will be having this video on our YouTube channel. And then, as I said, it will be being pushed out into our podcast universe as well. Michele, Tricia, great job today. Interesting topic. I know I mentioned been very valuable to me, the CliftonStrengths Finders. I know that you can bring that information to other folks and companies as well. And thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and wisdom with us today.
Thank you for having us. We really enjoyed being here. I don't know if this made it into the show notes either, but tmcolab.com is where you can find more information about our workshops as well.
Say that one more time so we get it in a second time, as well as don't forget about the roofing company website.
Yes. So tmcolab, COLAB.com is where you can find more information about our strengths workshops. And then if you need maintenance or a new roof, call mintroofing.com.
All right.
Thanks
Tricia,
for having us, Rick.
Yeah, Tricia, thanks for joining us as well. Appreciate it very much. Look forward to having you both back again.
Thanks. Great conversation.